Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the ways in which we can rethink research impact by focusing our attention to publications outside of peer-reviewed articles. What you'll probably notice is that you spend a lot of time working on journal papers, which is, part of our academic load. But sometimes the readership to those papers, the capacity for them to be cited or shared with others, can be really limited, particularly if you work in a space that's quite a niche topic area. So one of the things that I've often thought about along my academic research career is the ways in which we might rethink research impact by focusing our attention to writing outside of the academic arena. I've shared my Twitter handle here, so I'm happy to continue the conversation. But I guess part of the emerging ideas about this conversation came about quite a few years ago when I finished my PhD in 2015. In the lead up to finishing my PhD, I spent a lot of time both researching, thinking, as well as considering ways in which I could boost my financial output alongside my APA scholarship that I had to complete my PhD. One of those ways I did that was by engaging in some freelance writing work. Now, freelance writing work has kind of dual benefits where it pays the bills, but it also gets you to consider how to take complex scientific messages and shift them around and produce them for wider audiences. I didn't just write about my research area. I wrote about parenting. I wrote about community issues. I wrote about things that interested me and what was happening in my life at the time. But that engaging relationship with editors really taught me about what people are looking for in terms of readership, rather than just thinking about what I wanted to write. So there's some of the things that I wanted to talk about in today's talk, about what it means to write outside the space and how for many it can be a rewarding experience seeing, a byline with your name on it, but it can also be terrifying at the same time. So I've just kind of put together some different ideas here and focused them at the end about a recent conversation article that I had and what the process was leading up to that. Because I think for a lot of us, we see the work that we do and we're engaged in the value of what we do, but we also then see things published and we can't necessarily work out the space in between what we're researching and how we might write it for others. Now, in doing some wider reading about the academic writing process, because we don't just wake up one day and know how to write, it's a repetitive, iterative process where you have to practice stretching that writing muscle, and you have to be open to scrutiny. You have your PhD supervisors that might say, I don't really know what you're talking about here. You have just sometimes gut-wrenchingly difficult desk rejects to papers that you might write that you submit to journals. You might have ongoing review, revise, resubmit focuses for your paper where you just feel like, I just want the thing published. But the editor might have a perspective, the reviewer might have a perspective. And so it can be a really humbling experience to get something published. So sometimes writing for the public can also add in that additional focus of fear of the unknown because it invites a conversation. If what you write is shared on social media, you're going to have people commenting on it. If it's shared in a magazine, you might be sitting in a doctor's waiting room and look over and see somebody reading your work. It can be a little bit like you're bearing your soul to the world. And that's why on my opening slide, I had a picture of Dr. Seuss's novel, Horton Hears a Who. Well, it's not a novel, it's a small book. But sometimes even writing small things can feel like a novel. But in thinking about the story behind Horton Hears a Who, it's where an elephant stumbles across a piece of clover and listening to that piece of clover very intently recognizes that there's a whole world existing in that small little speck. Sometimes the writing and the research work that we can do sometimes feels like that tiny speck in the universe. And we might know it intimately, but it's our job to tell others why it's so important to consider. So here's some of my ideas that I've got today about what it means to write for broader audiences. Now, I say this not just as someone who's done freelance writing and also has academic peer-reviewed articles, but a lot of my work also exists in grey literature. technical reports with the Sachs Institute, technical reports for the Royal Commission into Institutional Child Sexual Abuse, as well as thinking about writing for places like The Conversation, Croaky, the blog, other magazines. Mind Food magazine had me as a guest writer for a number of years. So it's about taking community issues and considering how they might be captured in 800 words, 1,000 words, 2,000 words. So one of the key things that I always have to remember is that writing for broader audiences forces us to take our complicated, sometimes whole career's worth of thinking and condense it down to a simple concept. Now remember, writing for a broader audience isn't making your message simplistic, it's simplifying it. It's not dumbing it down, it's condensing it so that people can read it and engage with it. Often we have the benefit in the academic space of writing about ourselves as the researcher or in third person. Writing for broader audiences can force us to reveal a little bit about ourselves. We might talk about I, we might talk about we might talk about this is my research. So there's some ownership of the work that you do. And that can feel both revealing and vulnerable at times, because you take yourself away from that safe academic space and you step out into the arena and you say, these are my thoughts and this is what I'm thinking. Now, the academic workload is hectic. We all know that all of the time. It hasn't changed in the 10 years I've been working here. I work with academics that have been at the uni for 20 years. It hasn't changed. But the academic culture doesn't always, A, prioritise all of the research work that we do, even those peer-reviewed articles, but it definitely doesn't prioritise writing for a broader audience. Until social media and media services worked within universities, there wasn't always a simple way for us to share the information out there with the rest of the community. But writing for a broader audience says to the people that might fund our ideas, to the editors that might be reading our peer-reviewed articles, that we're not only considering the ways of producing what it is that we've researched into a peer-reviewed article, but we're committed to sharing it with the community and, in a health research perspective, sharing it with the people that we're actually studying. So it enhances your research impact by being able to take out the middleman. Journals often sit behind a paywall for the general community. Writing about the work that we do in mainstream media means that it's accessible and inclusive of all. Now, a lot of people say, if I talk about, oh, that opportunity came up on Twitter, or I connected with that person on LinkedIn, or I shared the work that I'm doing on my Facebook page. People often say one of two things. A, I don't have time to do that. Or B, I'm worried that people might take my words and misrepresent them. There are a lot of examples of academic work going viral. Going viral isn't always a negative thing. Sometimes it's just about sharing something at the right time that connects with community attitudes. Going viral for negative reasons is a whole other thing, and it's probably not the focus of what I'm hoping to talk about today. Because in all of the years that I've been writing for mainstream media, I've never had a negative experience. And that's because I'm always really sure about what it is that I'm writing and making sure that I understand the topic really well so that I can justify what I'm talking about. I think the way that we need to think about it is that writing for a broader audience allows us to kind of cut through the bullshit. No lofty academic jargon, no long sentences where even sometimes I'm reading someone else's work and I think, I have no clue what they're talking about. Short, sharp, simple sentences with either a call to action at the end or an overwhelming message that you want people to take away from what it is that they're reading. Don't just tell people what you've learned, show them what you've learned and give it to them on a bit of a platter. So, some of the practical tips that I've always used in my writing process, and it's still a work in progress. I don't think you ever get to a point where you think, great, I have achieved hero status in writing. This is all I need to do. I'll just keep reproducing the same work. The only way that you can work on your writing is to read, read, read. Now, sometimes I feel like a bit of a mum when I say that, because I'll say to my kids, if you're struggling with your creative writing at school, maybe you need to read a little bit more and get off the PlayStation. So think about what you're trying to do. Don't just read academic journals. Subscribe to other places that share academic insights. The Conversation is a great place to start. Read outside of your discipline. You can get a daily Nature snapshot article that gets sent to your inbox every morning that allows you to see how other people are writing. Really condensed scientific information, reduced down to bite-sized chunks, so you can read it with your morning cup of coffee and think, wow, I never thought about that before. The other thing that's always really important to do is to listen. When you're listening to podcasts or at conferences, think about the things that makes information engaging for the person that's receiving the information. That's what you want to convey to your readers. The other thing is if that you're considering writing outside the academic space, know your intended audience. Sometimes writers make the mistake of writing for themselves when they're not seeing who it is that reads the information. You can get a really simple barometer for who an audience is by the way in which people might comment on social media, or even in the conversation. You can see the comments that people include below. It gives you an idea about whether or not it's a lay person that's more often reading than not, an academic audience reading, and then you can shape the information to make sure that it connects with your intended audience. One of the things that I often do, I have a 16-year-old daughter, is I share what I'm writing with her and her friends. And because they're teenagers, they're quite brutal in their feedback. But they'll often say to me, I don't understand what you're writing about here. Or they go, that's really cool. I think I get what you're saying. Is this what you're writing about? And so it's a really nice way to think about what level you're pitching at. Because mainstream media is technically pitched at a kind of year 9, year 10 audience in terms of literacy. So you want to make sure that if you're writing something and it's wordy and verbose, it's not going to connect with the people that you want to talk to. The next practical tip is pitch with focus and certainty. Tell the editor, if you're reaching out to them or cold calling them, why you're the best person for the job. This is who I am. This is what I know. This is what I'd like to write about. Before you do those things, check with your academic supervisor, your discipline lead, or your media team to make sure that it's okay for you to talk about what you're talking about. It's always nice to give a heads up to your media team if you've got something in production, if something's going to come out, if it's a good news story, because it means that you're all kind of working on the same wavelength. It's also sometimes helpful to talk to the media team, considering that they have media training. Say to them, this is what I'm trying to write about. Does this make sense to you? Is this something that fits with the strategy of the university? You think about the University of New England and our future fit ideas. Does this fit with the theme of what we're trying to convey about what our university does? The other thing is sometimes that we have big ideas and we don't follow them through. If you want to write something, you have to write something down. Don't just spend all of your time planning, okay, this is what I'm going to write about. Write it, then refine it, then think about where it might fit, where its home might be. If you get a rejection, and I know most of you that have pitched to the Conversation before have had rejections, it's okay to go, oh, that's really frustrating. Okay, going to brush myself off and start again. I've had 3 papers published in the Conversation over the span of probably 7 years, and I've probably pitched another 10 times. Sometimes they'll get through to the next phase. Most of the time, I'll get a desk reject that just says, this isn't of interest to us right now. Thanks very much. So it's just a matter of saying, okay, maybe not for now. I'll pack that idea away. I might think about it some more. And when there's something really significant or a really significant hook about my research or my reflections or what's happening in the world, then I might reach out again. Just remember that writing anything as a PhD student, as an early career researcher, as a mid or senior career researcher, remember that writing anything will help your writing skills. It doesn't all have to be for best. It can just be your thoughts, feelings, emotions at the time. One of the strategies that Professor Miff Maple and I use is that we sometimes call each other and record the conversation to say, I'm going to work on this paper. I'm going to think about this project. Let's record that. We'll transcribe it. And then that's the beginning of the writing process or the project formulation process. Not everything we do is going to come out our fingers. Sometimes it'll come out our mouths, but we can transcribe it, and that's called writing too. So where can you get some great resources to help you? Of course, the number one space is the Thesis Whisperer. Inga Mubin writes a lot about the process of sharing our takeaways as well as the process of doing research. There's a great resource in Australia called the Health Writers Hub. There's Pat Thompson's blog talking about the process of being an academic. Keep an eye on Times Higher Education. The Guardian Australia is always a great way to consider the ways in which they invite academics to talk about their work. The same thing for SBS Life and ABC Life. Often you'll see that there are invited opinion pieces by academics. All academics have opinions. I think sometimes that's what brings us to this space. So it's okay to put yours forward if you feel really strongly about it. I know that across a number of universities, The Conversation or Croaky as a public health blog will often come to the university or via Zoom will do some webinars and seminars about how to get published by them. Even if you don't have an idea, go along. Even if you've just started your PhD or your master's, go along. Learning to write in any form is going to be helpful for all of the work that we already do. Another thing that I used to do a lot, and time gets away from you over time, is that every time I would read something to do with work, or even like kind of non-fiction books or narrative non-fiction books, I think, wow, I really love this style of writing. It might not even be the topic that interests me, but I might be pulled in to read something. Have a look at the way that that person writes, how they structure their sentences, how they kind of weave their themes through their writing, and keep it as good examples of good writing. Remember that different forms of writing allow you to keep reinforcing the so what of all of the research work that you do. Another thing that's really helpful is listening to podcasts about writing. Sometimes when you're out walking, you're doing the dishes, I often listen to podcasts while I'm cooking dinner at night. It makes you consider concepts that you don't necessarily get around to when you're sitting at your desk each day. It's also a great boost for your morale, given how long the academic publication process is. For me, I think that the longest I've had so far is from submission to publishing over 2 years to see a paper out there. Writing for other audiences means that you get a little bit of a hit of being able to share what it is that you're writing about before that process takes place. So to finish up today, I just wanted to provide a little bit of a case study about the working process that I had in terms of my most recent paper in The Conversation. Now, this is the first time that The Conversation have approached me to write something. The other 2 papers I've had, I have approached them. The first one was about respecting the privacy needs of missing people. And that was in the second year of my PhD. It was something actually that came up as a conversation with Professor Miff Maple and I. And I was able to pitch. It was shared. It didn't have great readership, but it was something that went on my academic transcript. So that was really helpful. The last one I had was in 2020, where I collaborated with a Canadian researcher. And we pitched to The Conversation in the Health and Society section about the upcoming National Missing Persons Week, where we wrote about what it meant to honour the experiences of people who return home from a Canadian and Australian experience. That was picked up because The Conversation were then able to share it across the Conversation Australia site, as well as the Conversation Canadian site, and it was then reproduced on the Canadian Missing Persons Research Hub space. So it got an opportunity for an increased readership, and we also tied it to the significant media across National Missing Persons Week at the time. So there were dual benefits across both the 2 researchers and the conversation itself. So in September of 2021, an editor from The Conversation contacted me and said that someone that had previously written for them about experiences of the pandemic and how we were all feeling, said that they had seen an editorial that I'd written for the International Journal of Mental Health Nursing around COVID and liminality, and that author suggested to The Conversation that I might be in a good position to write a piece for them as a continuation on from a piece that they had written for The Conversation. So really interesting to kind of use your professional networks in that way. Also really important to remember that if someone approaches you to write something and it's outside your area of expertise, pass it on to the right person. It gives you good academic brownie points to say, not me, but that person would be better. So The Conversation editor contacted me. This is an example of what it is that they asked me to do. They gave me 6 days to write it, and they were really clear about what they wanted. So you might take this as an indicator for how you might approach breaking down your pitch to The Conversation. Now, there was only 800 words that I was able to be given to write this. My first thought when I looked at it was, there's 800 words in the description of what they want me to write. So I started to think about, okay, what is my approach to here? What am I going to value add? What other reading do I need to do to make sure I can speak with certainty as to what I'm writing about? And what's my time frame? If I've got 6 days, when should I start? When should I have my first messy draft done? When should I submit? What I did was I took all of these concepts, I moved them to a Word document, and I answered the ones that I already knew. And then I went away and did some more reading, writing, thinking, and then added some concepts back in. Then I took out all of the questions. I polished it up. I sent it to both my academic supervisor, I sent it to my daughter, and I sent it to my long-suffering husband, who I make him read everything because he's an engineer, and I know that there will be people like him who have very rigid ways of thinking, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't too floral in my writing, because sometimes that happens as a qualitative researcher. We get caught up in the story and we forget what the main hook needs to be. I kept coming back to those keywords from the editor: short, snappy. One of the great things that you're able to do with The Conversation is that they provide you with a space where you have your own dashboard and you upload your information into there. So I always write in a Word document and then pull it over to this working space. So The Conversation has a really great option, a little bit like Studiosity, where they provide you with a readability function. You can see here that this has got a green light on it. My first draft, first of all, was too long, so that meant that the red light came up. My second draft had enough words in it, but it was too wordy within the sentences, so I had a yellow light on it. If you click down on that, it'll tell you some ideas about what you're doing wrong, that your sentences are longer than 20 words, that your paragraphs are too short in some places and too long in others, that you haven't used enough hyperlinks to be able to give the reader something to go off and read next, or that it was just a little bit too abstract for the audience that they were hoping to read for. So you just keep tweaking with it until your little green light goes green. And then when you're happy with it, you send it through to the editor. So you just click the submit to the editor button. I sent that through the night before the deadline. The editor came back to me the night after, was happy with some parts, wanted some other parts to change. Most importantly, she wanted to change the title of the paper. What she wanted to change it to, I wasn't happy with. And sometimes it can feel a little bit like a power imbalance. But I thought, you know what? Do I want that on my ResearchGate profile? Would I use a title like that in my writing? I thought, actually, I won't. So I just went back and said, not happy with that, but this is what I'm offering up instead. And she accepted that. We had a few more iterations over the next few days. It often means that you have to work at night in order to get it back to them the next morning. And then it was published. So what was the end result? Why do it? Now, as a qualitative researcher, you're probably thinking, why am I sharing metrics? But this is an indicator about how quickly writing for a non-academic space can connect you with readers. In the 4 weeks, 3.5, 4 weeks since the paper was published, it's had almost 30,000 readers. 18 comments that are from across the world have been shared within the actual document. And I notice that the article itself has been shared across their Facebook page, their LinkedIn page, as well as their Instagram page, with a link within those spaces to push people to read the article. Within a day of it being published, I got contacted by ABC Radio in Sydney, was asked to do an afternoon session talking about what I'd learnt from writing this piece, what I'd learnt from my career working in the space of liminality and how we could apply those learnings to the pandemic. And then the producer of that show said to me, we'd really love you to come back on a regular basis. Every time you write something or produce something, can you just share us a link? And then we'll see if it fits in with the conversations we're having. So you can see that even over time, I'll just move my face here, even over time, you can see a steep incline of the article over the first couple of weeks, and that was where it was continually shared, but it also sustains readership over a period of time. Across the life of the 3 articles I've read, I think there's been 60,000 readers. And it also allows you, if you're thinking about promotional opportunities or where you sit within your university, it allows you to see your institution's analytics as well. So this shows the top articles for the last 6 months shared by people that write within their roles at University of New England. And you can see that it comes in as 3rd, but it also shows that it doesn't mean that as soon as you write something within the first month or 2 that it disappears. Gisella's paper here around magpies seems to get shared every time magpie swooping season begins. And there's lots of information that then continually gets connected with here. There was also one that was a little bit further back about some of the archaeological team's reflections on what we can learn from ancient brains. And even once you leave an institution, because Xanthi Mallet is no longer at our university, there's still some continual focuses from a paper that was written 5 years ago that still gets hits over time. So it doesn't mean that you get published, there's a flurry of activity and then it dies down. It gives you the opportunity to claim your space and to talk about what it is that you're passionate talking about. So in finishing up, my top tips around writing for non-traditional research spaces, particularly talking about the conversation here, is keep an eye on the trending articles that are shared. Think about the ways in which they have short, snappy titles. Think about the fact that they're time dependent. Is something happening right now that you could write about? Or is there something happening later in the year? Kim writes a lot about COVID or about bushfires. We're coming up to the 2nd anniversary around the bushfires, thinking about, how people might be acknowledging those rituals as we move forward, or what have we learnt looking back. Those sorts of articles are really great opportunities for us to take all the stuff that we have up here and put it on paper. Make sure as well that you collaborate with others to enhance readership. Show the conversation that you're also sharing it across your platforms. If you've written something and you haven't been engaged with UNE Media, reach out to them. Tell them, hey, I've had this paper published. It'd be great if you could pop that on your LinkedIn profile, or I'm happy to have a conversation with you about it for Pulse. It's a great way to make sure that the work that you're doing doesn't just hide in the papers that we write. Remember that pitching is not the beginning and end of the process. You pitch, you write, and then you go through, just like with a journal, the to and froing of what works, what doesn't work. Push back if you're not comfortable with what they've decided to do with your work. And most importantly, remember we talked before about the negative aspects of going viral. Make sure that all of the links that you include are appropriate and they are supporting peer-reviewed articles. The conversation has a preference for links that go to open access articles to make sure that everyone can read what it is that you're talking about. But do your homework beforehand. Don't quickly Google something and add it in to kind of pad out the work that you're doing. You don't want to have to retract the article, because while there's an opportunity to enhance readership, you don't want to get attention for the wrong reasons. So I hope that's been helpful. Good luck. And remember that it's not about an ego boost writing about what we've learnt. It's about making sure that the work that we do has the most impact for the communities that we're working with and for. Get in touch if you've got more questions, and good luck with all of your writing work. Thanks.